My name is Sara Shikhman. I'm a managing partner here at Lengea Law, and this is part of our series on how to position your med spa to be ready for a sale. And today we have a really special guest speaker who we've worked with before on a couple of transactions selling med spas, and he'll introduce himself. And just to give you a little bit of background, we work as lawyers either to buyers or sellers when people are selling or buying a practice. So if you have any interest in potentially exploring that, even if not today, but a year or 2 years from now, the time to prepare for that is now. And Jerry's going to talk about what you can do to prepare. But Jerry, thank you for joining us. And why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, hi, my name is Jerry Diza with Pacific Reliance Medical M&A Advisors. I'm also the managing partner with the company, and we sell medical-based businesses nationally, and my specialty is medical spas. So I'm heavily into medical spas, and that's how Sarah and I connected. I also have a bookkeeping firm specifically for medical spas, and so we've been selling, and I've been selling medical spas now probably for the last 4 or 5 years, and we sell nationally, as I mentioned. So glad to be here and
Awesome.
hopefully offer some advice and some tips to our people out there.
Perfect. So let's say someone's looking to position their business for sale. What are some of the first things they should think about and do to make that happen?
Wow, there's I can talk for hours on this, and I've also got a brochure that I can send out to people down the road if they like. But let's just stick with maybe the top two or three, right? So the first thing is obviously, as you said, right? What are what are we looking for when we sell a business? So the term there is business. Okay, we're looking for a business that's running on its own. Okay, so we want an absentee run business. Think of a McDonald's, right? You've got the owner. The owner's not flipping burgers. He's not behind the cash register, right? The owner's at the golf course. Okay. Now, of course, it pops in every so often to with McDonald's. Okay. Same thing with medical spas, right? I can't tell you how many owners, when I talk to them, they're the superstar, right? They're bringing in, maybe 60, 70% of the revenue, and they have a couple of providers, but they're still the superstar. So we want to get away from the owner being the rock star of the company. Okay, and let's say, for example, let's say we have Sarah Smith's med spa, right? We don't want to have a name, the owner's name tied to the med spa if possible. So that's maybe where we change the DBA before we sell it. Okay, and I'm sure that's something you can help them with, but we want it to be a more all-encompassing name, right? So when the buyer does buy it, think about it this way, right? If you're selling a med spa, let's say in, I don't know, in Chicago, and the buyer's from New York, right? They're going to have to step into your business and be able to run it. But if you're the superstar, then it makes it very difficult. Okay. So if you haven't already created your standard operating procedures and your policies and all, make sure you get that in order, and then train your providers to do more of your work, and of course have one of your managers take over the ordering of inventory and the hiring and firing of people and the scheduling and that type of thing. So it looks like or becomes absentee run. That's one of the things that I would recommend. Another thing I see is a lot of times I get books and records that are all, I hate to say, they're all jacked up, right? I get it. When you first start your med spa, right? You're new. You're probably a doctor. You just got out of working at Kaiser, or maybe you're a nurse or an NP, and you're setting up you have an MSO PC setup. Okay, and you're struggling, right? You're starting at your company, and you're probably using, your sister-in-law who does bookkeeping on the side part-time. Okay, that's great when you're first starting out. Okay, but when you start hitting revenues of seven, 800,000, $1 million a year plus, you really need a professional bookkeeping firm now to take care of your books. And ideally, we like to be able to track the numbers, like where's the money coming from for the revenues? Is it a lot of neurotoxins? Is it coming from a lot of lasers? Is it coming from IV hydration? Because a lot of times I'll get the P&L and they're all just jumbled together. So when it comes time to sell, the buyer is going to want to see where the numbers are coming from. Okay.
So let's say somebody's books are all over the place, right? And they've been using some combination of paper charts and some POS, is that something a bookkeeper can do, help them with, let's say, virtually? So if somebody is in New York and the bookkeeper is in California, can you help them virtually, even though you can't come on site?
Absolutely, absolutely. Assuming we're not using paper charts, right? If you're on paper charts, then you've got to have your assistant or your manager put that all in electronic form. But if it's all electronic, yeah, a good bookkeeper could be anywhere in the world, quite honestly, and do the books. Just make sure though that they understand med spas. So what we're looking for in the financial statements is the numbers, right? The key performance indicators. Right. Obviously, number one is revenues. What are the revenues looking like? The average med spa, according to AmSpa, does about 140, 130,000 a month in revenue, right? So a little bit under, 1.7 a year in sales. So if we're way below that, we want to figure out, okay, what happened, right? Why are we so way below the industry average? Okay, we also want to look at cost of goods, right? If your cost of goods are way out of whack, they're running at 60, 70%, which I've seen, and there's a question there. Well, what happened, right? Same thing with labor costs. If the labor costs are way out of whack, that they're running at 50%, okay, so these are the key performance indicators that we want to look at even before we go to market, because we want to see, okay, remember, once we hit the market, right, these numbers are going to be shown to the buyer. So we want to make sure that these numbers have been cleaned up before we take it to market. Okay, so those things, right? The key performance indicators being the revenues, the labor cost, the cost of goods, and then the bottom line. What is that? The profit margin, right? An average profit margin for a good med spa is about 25 to 30%. Okay, some of them are doing above that, which is really great, right? When you're getting revenues of $3-4 million a year, then yeah, you'll see lower labor costs and cost of goods just because they can buy a bigger volume, and of course, you have the same staff doing all the work. But in general, like I said, you need to know your numbers, because definitely the buyer is going to know the numbers, right? So we want to know that when we go to market, it's spot on. Keep in mind, right? When the buyer sees those numbers, right, they're going to base their letter of intent, their LOI, based on those numbers. So it's critical that the numbers are accurate, but they're also in line with industry standards and hopefully above industry standards.
And let's say you are the rock star provider, right? Like a lot of our clients are in a situation where they are the main driver of revenue, they are the main MD, NP, PA, whatever. How do they transition? Like what do they do if, let's say, they want to sell their business in a year or two? Should they hire, let's say, an RN or another NP now to get that person up to speed? Like, what do you think are some of the steps that they can take?
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? They've got to hire providers to take over their work, so that when we hopefully look at the Yelp reviews, which buyers are going to do, right? They're not going to see, Dr. So and so, Dr. So, this Dr. So and so is an amazing person. We want to see different people on that Yelp review, so to speak, right? And again, we don't want the practice to be heavily dependent on the owner. So yes, absolutely, hire good people now and start training them, and get it to where you can walk away, or the owner can step away from doing the provider work.
And how long does it take for like a deal to happen, right? From the time you've seen, let's say, a first buyer shows interest to when a transaction will close. Like, is it a month, a year, something in between?
Oh, okay. So good question. So typically the process is this, right? Once we start marketing it to the public, we're going to get a letter of intent, the LOI. Okay. And then from that LOI, we'll ask for proof of funds, and then we'll do some vetting of the buyer. And then we'll present that to the seller. Okay. So at that point, if the seller likes what they see, right, now we can go to a discovery call. So the discovery call, that's where the buyer and seller get to know each other. If they feel comfortable with each other and they want to move forward, and again, the seller likes what they saw in the letter of intent, then we go into the due diligence phase. The due diligence phase, this is where the buyer is going to hire their business attorney and their CPA to do a deep dive into the practice. And that can take anywhere from 2 to 3 months up to a year, depending on how much there is to uncover. And again, the revenues, and the due diligence time for a single unit med spa is different than a multi-unit, right? If you have 4 or 5 locations, it's going to take a little bit longer, because they got to go into the books and records of each location, which goes back to the we talked about the books and records, right? When you're tracking revenues, you want to track it per location as well, right? Not just have all of it jumbled up. And it's, again, unfortunately, I get that from a lot of the owners, where it's just a hodgepodge of numbers put together. So typically, I mean, minimum is about 2 months, because remember, if you're selling something for $1 million plus, right? I mean, that's a pretty penny there.
Hmm?
So the buyer is going to be very cautious, and going to do their deep dive into this.
Got it. And typically, do you see the buyers asking the previous owners to stay on for some time? Or is it like you close the deal and then you can, go on vacation for 6 months?
Good question. It depends on the buyer. Okay, there's different types of buyers out there, right? I basically put them in four categories. First category might be a doctor who, again, burned out of working at Kaiser, wants to go in and open up their own clinic. Med spas are great because it's all cash, right? It's a nice, easy transition, right? And you don't have to deal with the headaches of insurance. The second type is non-doctor. Okay, it might just be an investor or an NP or a P that needs to set up an MSO PC setup. Okay, so they're looking to buy a practice. The third type of buyer is a strategic buyer. Okay, that buyer might already have 2 or 3 med spas in their portfolio, and they're just looking to add on more for their family. Okay, it might be a small family office. The fourth type is the private equity groups. Okay, so the private equity groups, they're going to come in and they're going to look at your company and they're going to want the owner to stick around for a few years and help them continue to grow the practice. And so what private equity is doing is they're rolling up medical sports, right? They're rolling up 25, 30 of these, and they're buying them at a lower multiple. And then when they have their 30 med spas, then they sell it to bigger private equity group or take it public. Okay, and then now they're selling it or valuing it at a higher multiple. It might be valued at a 7 or a 10x multiple. And that's where they'll have the owner stick around for basically 2 bites of the apple, right? Originally, when they got the first offer, when they first sold it, and then sticking around, helping continue to grow it. And then when they sell to bigger private equity, then they get a bite of that next purchase or that next sale at a higher valuation. Okay, so depending on the buyer, that depends how long the owner will stay. Okay, the first 3 types that I mentioned, they typically, they might have you stick around for a month or two, show the new buyers the ropes, so to speak. It might be up to 6 months if it's someone new that doesn't have any med spa practice experience. But again, private equity will be, years. So all depends on what your strategy is, what your exit strategy is, and what the seller wants to do.
Got it. And let's say people have like some skeletons in the closet, right? Let's say people have lawsuits or some inappropriate things happening, right? What's a good strategy for people that you've seen to sort of close out these issues before the sale? Or is it better to just kind of, pretend like they're not there? Because we certainly have
No,
seen.
we never, we never want to pretend they're not there. So no, that's whenever something like this comes up, they should be contacting you, right? We definitely don't want any issues with the medical board. We don't want any issues with workman's comp or with OSHA or any other agency out there. And obviously we don't want any lawsuits. If there's, if someone got hurt by a laser or maybe there was an injection that didn't go quite right, try to get that out of the way quickly and try to appease the patient quickly. Right. And I'll definitely contact an attorney because this could blow up and you want to get good legal advice up front. Right. But yes, think about it this way, right? When you're selling a practice, the buyer doesn't want any headaches, right? They want to buy a nice, clean running business that they can just take over and continue to grow. But if there's legal issues there, that'll really slow down everything. Okay. And it'll scare buyers away. It'll give it a lower valuation if they do want to buy it, or it'll scare them away altogether. So yeah, definitely, we need that taken care of, and talk to an attorney ASAP if you think something's coming up.
And let's talk a little bit about holdbacks and things like that. So a lot of deals that we see have, let's say, a 10% holdback. So the buyer will pay, let's say, 90% to the seller, but they're going to keep 10% for, if things happen to be reimbursed, or if some performance metrics are not met. So tell us, how common is that for you and like what you're seeing?
So if it's an SBA deal, right? If SBA is financing the transaction, that's very common now. They'll ask the owner to do a 10% carryback, and it might even be silent for 2 years. They might say, okay, we don't even want the seller to get paid for the next 2 years or the next year, whatever it may be, whatever SBA determines on what they see on the financial statements. So yeah, that's very common with SBA loans. If it's all cash, you see that every so often. You'll see it might be an earnout. They might say, look, we'll set it up to where, we'll pay you your 3 million, okay, but we're going to only offer you 2.5 million. We're going to hold back the 500,000 for the next year, and we're going to want to make sure that we're hitting key performance numbers. And and they might have a clause in there saying that the seller will be part of that transition for the next year to help them transition smoothly, that type of thing, right?
Mhm.
So it gives the buyer the assurance that the owner's not just going to grab the employees or clients and run away, right, and start up another med practice down the road. And of course, there's also non-compete clauses in our contracts but But that's the biggest fear of a buyer, right? And it makes sense. If you were buying a, a multi-million-dollar practice, you'd be the same way. So yes, very, very common that there's a holdback.
Yes, and are the LOIs that you see, are they usually binding or non-binding? Like tell the people listening like how the LOI works versus the actual contract.
Okay. All right. So with us, right, we try to give out as much information as possible before the LOI is drafted up. Right. So we're a little bit different in our company. And a lot of companies first they'll do a teaser summary, and then once that goes out, then they'll have their buyers go in there and into their data room and look at all the data and so forth. We're just the opposite. We put everything first up front in our summary, right? And of course, it's still generic. We don't have the name of the practice or the location, but we have all the information in there so that when the buyer does draft up a letter of intent, it's based on the numbers that we've been provided by the seller. We talk through all this before we go to an LOI, right? Because by then I would have known what my seller wants, right? If my seller wants a quick sale or if they want to stick around for 2 years or what have you. So whatever the seller wants, then I let the buyer know that, and then the buyer and I will then figure out, okay, well, how do you want to present an LOI to the seller so the seller accepts it, right? That they're happy with it. So we try to knock out all the terms up front so we're not having to scramble in the middle or at the end after due diligence, right? We want to get all the numbers up front. So to answer your question, yeah, it all depends on how you set it up initially. Okay. And again, I don't like changes. I like to have my offers when they come in. Okay, I pretty much know, okay, that the LOI is going to look very similar to the actual purchase agreement because I disclosed and answered all the questions and provide all the documents in the very beginning.
Okay, and now the $1 million question. What kind of multiples are you seeing? And multiples of what? Right? Like
Okay.
let's say to use a simple number, somebody's med spa annual revenue is $1 million and their EBITDA is 250,000 and it's one location.
Okay.
What type of multiple and of what could you expect the possible purchase price to be?
Okay, so you said EBITDA, not SDE, right? So EBITDA means that that earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, and basically means that it's like a McDonald's, it's running like a McDonald's, right? The owner's not there, they're not the superstar, and it's running well. And I'm also assuming it's in a good location, right? Obviously, there's a big difference of being in Manhattan or Beverly Hills versus Podunk, Idaho, right? So there's other factors that we look at, but typically, I mean, if it's absentee run, it's good numbers. Probably looking at maybe 3 to 5x, depending. Okay, so when you ask the question 3 to 5x, what does that mean, right? 3x, 4x, 5x. That means 3 times, okay, or 4 times or 5 times the EBITDA. Okay, so let's say it's doing 300,000 a year in EBITDA, right? So it
Mhm.
can range anywhere from 3 times, so that would be 900,000, up to 5 times, which is 1.5 mil. Okay, so there's a lot of factors in the middle, right? We have to look at how has the history been for the last 3 years, right? We don't look at just one thing because the buyer's not going to look at just one thing, right? They're going to look at a whole number of things. So it's going to be the history, right? How has it been performing the last 3 years? Okay, how is the staff? Is there a high turnover or is the staff pretty stable, right? Again, location. Is it located in a high end, valuable place where people want to live, where the owner wants to live, or is it some podunk town in Idaho, right? So there's a number of things that we look at, which gives it that fluctuation of a 3x to 5x, right? Typically, though, if you're a seller, you're going to want to price it as high as you can. And so that's kind of what we do. We're going to price it at the highest of what we think we can get it for. And then we'll let the offers come in from there, right? Because we don't want to leave enough money on the table. Okay, but so that's how we look at it, right? It is when we say multiple, we multiply profit, in this case the EBITDA, times a number, a 3, a 4, or 5. So usually it sells between a 3 and a 5x, depending on how it's being run. Okay, that's different than SDE, which is a seller's discretionary earnings. Okay, that's where we factor in. That's where the owner's a superstar, right? The owner's bringing a lot of the revenue, so that brings down the valuation. Okay, typically, if I've had a lot of one owner med spas that contact me, and it's hard to sell those for even at a 2x because again, there's so much risk for the buyer when it's a single practice med spa.
Yeah, I agree. I think those are much harder and people want something that could run without the owner. Otherwise, they're like, okay, well, you, the owner, have to stick around for the next 5 years while we find a way to replace you. So it's better if the owner can replace themselves first and then
Right.
try to sell their practice.
And again, we're not saying that the owner has to step away completely, right? I mean, if they enjoy doing provider work, that's great, right? Because a lot of people do, and a lot of owners do enjoy that. So what I'm saying though is just don't be the superstar, right? Maybe the 20 or 30% part of that revenue rather than the 60 or 70%. So that's what you get, hire providers and have them do more of the work.
Yeah, and I think another thing that comes up too is having a lot of your revenue concentrated in like one product or one service. So it's also good to diversify your revenue streams so that you're not doing just Botox or just semaglutide or just one thing. It's better to have like different things, right, that are bringing you in revenue, not just one thing that you're dependent on.
That's right. And you know, a big thing too is memberships. You know, a lot of people they shy away from it because they see it is a lot of work. It takes
Mhm.
a little more brain work to make it work. But that is another plus for a med spa, right? When they have a strong membership program. You know, I've sold med spas in the past where they've had, I mean, their membership was bringing in an additional 20,000, 30,000 a month. You know,
Right.
that's incredible for a single unit location.
Yeah, definitely. And that's recurring revenue that's valued at much higher. So it's
Yep.
much better. So
Yes.
if someone's, started their med spa and they're kind of just, let's say, running it for the first year or two, just in the very beginning. So they're not really thinking about a sale right imminently, but they want to build it for a sale eventually. What's like one thing that they should think about as just as they're starting?
Think about how to position your business to be sellable within 3 years, right? Because that gives you enough time to get all the kinks out of the business and so forth. So I think part of it starts with the vision, right? If you don't know to think this way, then you kind of just go day to day. But you got to
Mm.
have a bigger vision, right? I've had clients where they have told me, "Yeah, Jerry, I started this with the intent of selling it down the road." Right? They already knew they were going to sell it down the road. So that's how I think that's smart for every business owner, right? When you're spending, when you're spending hours, 10, 12 hours a day at your practice, you want to have something sellable down the road, right? Not just making the money in the interim, but yeah, down the road, it'd be happy, nice to be able to sell something and, walk away with another few $1,000,000, right? And unfortunately, I hate to say it, a lot of doctors don't think that way. I get it. They don't teach you this in medical school, right? And this is what I hear a lot from doctors. I'm a great doctor. I'm a horrible businessman. Okay. So that's at least they see that. So if that's the case, then fine, then hire, speak to people that have done it or hire MedSpa consultants that have done that already, that have already. In fact, I've got some consultants I can refer you to. If you go to our website, you'll see some of our resources. The MedSpa consultants on my MedSpa are actually owners whose companies I've sold in the past. So now they're consulting and helping other MedSpa owners do the same.
Gotcha. Awesome. Thank you. I think this is super valuable. It's great information for everyone to know. And yeah, like I think it's great advice for someone to, if you're building a business to sell, to really build that from the start, as opposed to, try to restructure things when you're already in the middle of a sale. So to all the people who are watching this, who are just starting med spas, this is valuable information too, because if your goal is eventually to sell it, you have to build it for a sale from the beginning.
In the very beginning. Yeah, have that in your mindset.
Well, thank you, Jerry. This is super helpful. How can people get in contact with you?
Oh, so a few ways. You can go to our website at www.pacificrib.com. You can contact me at jdiza, Jdiza at pacificrib.com. Or you can call us at 949-229-2464.
Okay,
So,
perfect.
yeah,
We'll put that at the end of the video too, so people have it. And thank you so much for your time today. This was great. I really appreciate it.
same here, Sarah. Thank you.